It was too much of a sweet thing. Documents that were recently discovered in the US show that in 1967, faced with rising concern about sugar causing heart disease, an organisation called the Sugar Research Foundation paid the equivalent today of $50,000 to 3 Harvard scientists to downplay the role of sugar and promote saturated fat as the heart disease bad guy. This research helped frame future studies and shape many dietary requirements that still persist today. It led to the rise of the low-fat, high-sugar products that now fill supermarket shelves across the world, and which many experts blame for the global obesity crisis. These revelations are from 50 years ago, and the system today is more transparent. But the food industry does still influence nutrition science. Just last year, the New York Times revealed that Coca-Cola paid millions of dollars for research that downplayed the link between sugary drinks and obesity. And in June, the Associated Press reported that candy makers were behind studies that claimed children who eat sweets weigh less than those who don't. The backlash to this is complete skepticism of the science and the rise of fad diets. We're told to completely cut sugar, cut carbs, go paleo, cut fats, cut gluten, eat superfoods, eat organic, eat good sugars and good carbs. With the contradictions and unrealistic advice, and a lack of trust in research, how are we supposed to know what is good for us and what is bad for us?
Well, joining me now from South Africa is Tim Noakes. He's a scientist and professor of sports medicine at the University of Cape Town. And from Maastricht in the Netherlands, I'm joined by Dr. Fred Broons. He's the chair of health food innovation at Maastricht University. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Tim Noakes, let me start with you. So I guess we knew a lot about big tobacco. We knew a lot about those other lobby groups. Is it becoming clearer and clearer as the years roll on that big sugar is a big player as well, and that maybe our sweet tooth that we thought was natural was maybe not so natural after all, and our tastes were being created by other people?
Well, I think you're quite correct. Big Food realized in the 1990s, when they'd already moved us away from saturated fat onto these high sugary foods, that sugar is addictive, and the more sugar you can get into the products, the more calories that people will consume. So the problem with sugar is its addictive nature. And if you put it into 80% of the processed foods, as is the case, it's not the calories the sugar provide that's the problem, it is the addictive nature. So humans evolved to eat perhaps once a day, maybe 1.5 times a day. That's our biology. We now are encouraged to snack every 3 hours, and the reason is because that's an addictive food choice. And those foods that you are showing us on the screen are highly addictive, and they are designed to make you want to eat more. And that is the basis for the nutritional problem that we have today.
Right. Straight question. Sorry to interrupt you, Professor Noakes. Straight question. Is fat better for you than sugar?
Absolutely. Good fat is. There's only one bad fat, and that's man-made fats. The trans fats, which are in polyunsaturated fats, the margarines, those are the dangerous fats. If the fats come from nature, they're healthy and they're very good. And there was never any evidence that fat is linked to heart disease or any disease.
Okay.
I must make the point that heart disease rose after 1910, after the First World War, 1920s, because we started to smoke. When people stopped smoking, the incidence of heart disease fell. It has now been overtaken by liver disease. There are more deaths every year from liver disease in the United States than from heart disease. And guess what's driving liver disease? It's sugar and carbohydrates. Right. So we have swapped heart disease for liver disease and diabetes.
Okay, so let's bring in Fred Broons. So we have these revelations from the Journal of the American Medical Association. You know, this paints an extraordinary picture of a sort of Mad Men era of big sugar creating our tastes. And Professor Tim Noakes goes a step further and says, you know what, fat's better for you than sugar. What do you think, Fred?
Well, I tend to look to it a little bit more balanced. I don't think you can say that fat is healthier than sugar is. It depends totally on the amounts that you consume. We know we eat too much sugar and we should cut down on that, but we live in a world where people like sweetness, and that makes it difficult to cut down. If we take out sugar, something else comes back in place, and most of the time it is starch or it is fat. And there are really good meta-analysis showing that it is not the type of, it is not the amount of fat that plays a role. It is not the type of sugar that plays a role, but it is the amount of calories that we have in total. So basically, I would say we consume too much of everything, and we should cut down on everything. What we consume too easily in high amounts is sugar with beverages, so we need to cut down on that. But it's too easy to say that fat is healthier than carbohydrate is.
Okay, let's bring in Tim Noakes. So, watch your calories, be balanced, be smart about this. You know, have your carbs or your sugar for fuel, but eat your vegetables, drink water, have some protein, have some fat. Just be balanced and sensible about it. How do you respond to that, Tim Noakes?
Well, that's all nonsense. It's like wishfully you can decide what to eat. Eating is controlled in the brain by a thing called the apostat, and the apostat has been hijacked by sugar. And once it's hijacked, you're in real trouble because you'll overeat calories. And you can't wishfully think, I can't encourage a person to smoke 1 cigarette a day if they're a smoker, or drink 1 drink of alcohol a day if they're alcoholics. We are addicted to food, and you have to take out the addictive component.
Sure, but we're not. But we're not evolved to sort of crave broccoli and kale, right? We do crave sweet things. So why would you want to cut it out? Because surely people will yo-yo back to the extreme if they cut things out totally.
Well, I haven't eaten sugar for 6 years, and I've never been healthier. So it's very easy to do if you want to do it. And I've replaced it with fat, and I eat a 70% fat diet, and I'm really loving it. And the reality is, once you start eating fat, you reprogram your apostat in the brain, you reduce your calories, you lose weight, you're never hungry, and so you don't worry about food. Food is utterly unimportant once you lose the cravings. And that's the problem, that the addictive nature of the foods that we're eating cause us to crave the foods, and we overeat them.
Yep.
And that's the problem. And another point, and
sure.
Fred and I had a big debate of this a few months ago in overseas in Amsterdam. But the point is that if you are insulin resistant, you're in trouble.
Right.
And insulin resistance means you cannot metabolize carbohydrate. And that is the commonest disease in the world, and it's not recognized. So it's all very well telling people who are insulin resistant to eat carbohydrates, it's healthy. It is not. That is what's killing us.
Yep.
Too much carbohydrates in people who are insulin resistant.
Yep. Good luck to your social life when you cut out all those carbs. Fred Brones, let me sort of look at the big picture then again once more and say, all right, so we know that the sugar industry has done some pretty ridiculous things. Coca-Cola as well has been dodgy in its dealings over the years. They've created taste. They've tried to give you the impression that, you know, fat is worse for you than sugar, and so on and so forth. That's happening. But on the other hand, you have the Paleo movement, you have the Banting diet, you have the Atkins diet, and so on. Fred, do you think that that is healthy for people to eat, for example, 70% fat in their diet and completely leave carbs alone?
At the end, well, for the general population, I don't think that that's a good thing. I think if we go to very high fat diets, that people will overeat as well. There are really good papers that show that cutting down on fat is more effective than cutting down on carbohydrate. With carbohydrate, the problem is that a part of the carbohydrate consumed is sugars with soft drinks. And if we look to overall sugar intake, then we see that soft drink consumption is clearly related to overweight and diabetes, but total sugar consumption with the whole diet is not. And that shows that consuming soft drinks is related to a type of lifestyle in which people move less, they smoke more, they drink more alcohol, etc. So it's a lifestyle issue, and I said we need to cut down on everything. If I go historically and I look to Paleo diet, then there is no evidence that people have ever been on a very high fat diet. All the calculations show that in Paleo times there was 35 to 40% of carbohydrate along with the same amount of fat. And I would say in current dieting we can go along the same quantities. Right. I wouldn't say that we need a very high carbohydrate, but we need to eat more plant-based. We need to eat less meat and more plant-based foods with high protein contents, and then we'll be much better off. And Tim says since he has been eating a lot of fat, he has lost weight, etc. And he says if you have type 2 diabetes or you are insulin resistant, and I agree with that, but the most effective treatment to go back from insulin resistance to normal metabolism is losing weight. And we can do that by eating less of everything, and particularly also by consuming less sugary beverages as soft drinks are, and go to more water consumption or take the zero-calorie versions of the soft drinks.
Right. So, Tim, we have established that a lot of sugar is pretty bad for you, particularly all these sugary drinks, having too many donuts, and so on and so forth. I want to give two examples. One of you and one of Pete Evans, the Australian celebrity chef. Now, he was planning a cookbook called Paleo Diet for Children, Baba Yum Yum, the Paleo Way. It encouraged parents to feed infants with a baby formula, which was a concoction made from bone broth, right? And then there was a bit of a scandal involving you because of Twitter advice that you gave to a breastfeeding mother, where you told her to, quote, wean the baby onto a low-carb, high-fat diet. Would you accept that when it comes to people's children, when that sort of advice is given, would you accept why, to some people, this sort of paleo way would sound more like an ideology and less like health advice?
Well, firstly, I didn't prescribe a diet to a mother. I gave general advice to a mother who said, what should mothers and babies eat? And that's a critical point, because as a scientist and a doctor, one can give general advice. I was not giving specific advice.
Okay.
However, the absolute evidence is that if you want a healthy child, you better wean them onto the foods that we prescribe. In other words, the foods that you eat. The paleo, what Evans calls the paleo foods, the meat, and the nutrient-dense foods, and the fish, particularly fish. Because why? Because humans evolved to get big brains, and we evolved those big brains by eating meat. And the time that our brain increases the most is from date of birth for the first 2 years. And if you do not feed the child all the nutrients they need, which you find in meat and fish and dairy, and you do not find them in cereals, you do not find them in grains, if you don't wean the child in that period on those foods, that child will suffer as a consequence. And that's what I've said, and the evidence is abundantly clear. What do you think babies were weaned on before 12,000 years ago, when cereals and grains got into the food stuff? And what were they? How could they eat these high fibrous vegetables that Fred wants us to eat? They couldn't. They could only eat liver and bone marrow and bone broth. That's what they ate. And that made us human, and that made us healthy. And for anyone to suggest the opposite, they simply don't know the history of human evolution.
And that gave us our big brains. Fred, very finally, the skepticism. Yvette spoke about it in her report that teed up this debate, the skepticism. So people are being told today, eat this and eschew that. How do you tackle the skepticism that the general public will have going, I really don't know what to do because I'm getting mixed messages, and maybe the messages that I'm getting right now are being funded by some lobby group, and we're going to find out about it in 30 years' time. What would you do to tackle that riddle, Fred?
Well, I would say don't listen too much to what you hear in the social media. Don't look too much on the internet. It's full of nonsense. Listen to the newly established dietary guidelines. We are currently reviewing those. They have just been established in the United States in 2015. They have adapted the guidelines that you can eat a little bit more fat. That's no problem. But the type of fat matters, and we should cut down on sugars. The same is being told by the World Health Organization. If we look to international dietary guidelines, whether they come from Canada or New Zealand or the Dutch dietary guidelines that we have here, or the Nordic countries guidelines, etc., they all point to the same thing: cut down on sugars, But be careful with fat and cut down on calories. And these guidelines, they are not much different than they were some years ago. They are moderate, they are not sexy news, so you won't find them really in the social media, but they are established by good scientists.
Unfortunately, I've got to interrupt you and end this because we are out of time. I've got to wrap. But Tim Noakes and Fred Bruins, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you so much.